So there's no fixing it. So you look at Plutchik's wheel that measures a gradient of the emotional status or state. It's a flux of a geometrical system where energy highlights one specific area of a spherical representation of, really, for lack of a better, the monad, a singular unit of measure. And then we see that something like Maslow's hierarchy of needs measures the base metabolic requirement to conditionally supply energetics toward the application of these emotions. And these emotions work a lot like the minus 0, 0, or minus 1, 0, and plus 1, which is always just really, from our esteem, 0. You can either see the Fibonacci sequence, the first integer, the first number is 0. And the reason that it can be 0, in truth, we're talking about esoteric mathematics, is that it is complete in and to itself, otherwise it could never be counted. Therefore, everything that's existential that falls under the Fibonacci sequence was never meant to be. It's making this disparate attempt at separating that which is already complete as a one, as a singular unit of one. It requires no refurbishing, no additions, and when this is done, there's a failure to understand what's happening inside of it. It's like Schrodinger's cat, but in the sense that we're not going to even go as far as to say that base reality, but through the observer effect, would be modifiable in any way, because the cat is an existential concept, and you might as well put a human in there. We like to think of things in terms of this techne type art, right? Or this machina type of automata. But the truth is that the cat is a highly intelligent animal, and it is a cat because of its existential properties. And a lot of what the cat is made up of is this interbreeding. So we're imbuing our self-proclaimed intellect when we even posit such a thing as Schrodinger's cat. What is meant to be said is that any type of intelligence placed within the non-observable field could both be dead and alive, right? But the truth is when we look at Kozyrev's mirror, right, we begin to see that within the experiment of the containment field, we have warped bent light, and that if something has a self, right, if something is beyond a computational system and has the presence of self, is going to be able to warp and bend space-time based upon its current conditional status. Many, from the butterfly effect, who's that? Justin Kutcher, might have the first name wrong. I've not seen that many movies with that guy, but I remember that movie. And then Adrian Brody with the jacket, right? Even Donnie Darko to some extent. You've got this concept, and really it's the same story told over and over again, right? It tries to posit itself in different ways, but it's the same story that's told over and over again. But what you've got is you've got something you got an object, an item, quite possibly from another point in space-time, that wouldn't have been if it didn't come from another dimensional space time. So what we are looking at here is everything is it's unfixable because of this idea of democratic union or liberation, that's as far as the human condition can come to, that everyone lives in the horror that they chose themselves and that they would choose themselves over and over again. That in their own paracosm, they see their universal model as the most supreme universal model. There's no way you can talk anyone out of it. It's like trying to, manipulate the Jehovah's witnesses that are coming to the door, right? They believe firmly that there's only so many people that are going to get into this heaven. They also firmly believe that they are not going to, but because they have a slim chance, right? We won't say it, okay, slim chance in hell to actually get into heaven, or to be in line to get into heaven, or really what they're trying to do is shake off other people. They're searching for people who are on that list, right? And don't know it, and can be sort of subverted by this sort of Amway pyramid scheme, right? So what we're always doing is we're trying to deceive each other. We're trying to deceive each other into this. We're trying to use our paracosm as a guiding light, the world that we created, the world that we see, that we believe is distinctly separate from everyone else's world, or Welt, Weltanschauung Krieg, right? And there's a lot of other posits and postulations to add little additional amendments onto that worldview. But what we really, we're constantly faced with this phenomenon and this noumenon, right? We're faced with this, I'd be bullshitting if I started to come up with philosophers and all this other stuff with my current status or state of thinking right now. But if at our base, when we're not able to think very clearly or very well, very much, we're able to assert and ascertain the fundamental truth that if we don't live for purity, and if purity doesn't represent the primary main principle, then every agenda, as you're looking through that Kozarev's warped time-space, space-time view of reality, the same bullshit rhetoric is going to be printed upon the field, right? So you're never going to get what nature, right, ontology, or the study of the intelligence, the intellect, the really what would be considered epistemology, right? Of how that subset, how that is laid out into the ontology of truth, right, or nature. We amend nature with our very presence, right? So we are what's wrong, and that's why we live in a containment field where we can warp space-time, but all we're ever doing, it's almost like looking into an ice cube, and you see, say a huge, massive permafrost ice sheet, right? And you see that there's a woolly mammoth on the other side. And the woolly mammoth is frozen, and by all means and purposes dead. But that would be the best representation of sort of this Schrodinger's cat, really, because it doesn't know it's dead, right? It doesn't know, it thinks that it's in a hibernated state. There's even a possibility with some technology somewhere at some time that could be tethered to the Earth, the planet, that woolly mammoth, that it was certain that woolly mammoth, through most approximations, most realities, would be frozen at or near that place. So it takes on a sort of median or general consensus, but that there would exist the technology to revitalize and even regenerate that woolly mammoth. So, in a sense, because of us, because of our inherent need to disobey the ontology, reality, a subset of nature and causal sets, right? That we feel superior to nature itself, to where we do not allow nature to go through its natural process. We say, no, that's wrong. As long as you are on the outs, and you're looking in at that cozy rev reflection and you're going, holy shit, I'm a loser in this other reality. I never discovered, quantum physics and took this sort of selfish path where now I'm respected and great, but in a very terrifying, warped way. You never would take yourself out of the equation, right? You'd always have to be like when people are regressed into these other lifetimes. They're always, Genghis Khan's, and this was part of the study with Kozarev's mirrors in 1990, ended December 1990, beginning in, but Kozarev was doing this in 1983. So they're not looking at the warped space time reality that connected those 7-8 years, right? They're not seeing the fundamental aspect that that there was probably an 8-year gap, and that 8 is a very significant number. That they were destined to be there, doing these strange meditations as the permafrost was melting around them, and they were still living within their own paracosm. They were not introducing any new concepts or ideas. In fact, most of them were afraid. They were warping the ontology. They were infecting the ontology. They were infusing the ontology. And people came back seeing only themselves. They came back only seeing what they really were. Because if they were really able to go in and do those studies, those experiments, which they didn't allow them to 100 times, and they truly were psychonauts, right? They truly were up there, just like the cosmonauts or the astronauts in space, right? That they are representing a country, and a country is representing its own futility, right? And it comes back to policies, procedures, laws that otherwise don't exist, all right? That's not ontology. Law is not ontology. Law isn't something that would definitely come to be. These jurisdictional grievances and powers, right? From an imperialist to communist capitulation back into imperialism, because you see when the communist pokes their head out for a moment, they realize that the fascist imperialistic way of doing things is what kept their people the way that they were, and allowed very little causality, right? So when we get to the place where we existentially no longer require corrupted government, especially to blame for our own corruption, and we come back to a sense or a place of purity, we would be walking through a heavily forested world, understanding everything and living in this phenomenal state of being and becoming. The stars above would recognize us. We would live in a place where every bit of will that we had, I don't wish to kill an animal today. I wish to find a berry bush, a nut tree, and there it is, right? There it is. And your mind is shaping a world on the contention of a practicum that is realistic, right? So what's happened is you have all these bent Kozarev mirrors in all of us. And even more so, there's even more than just one warped reality that exists in each one of us. We're reflecting off of one another. Now we have tens of thousands of satellites above us that are optically warping reality. It's viewing us. The most critical thing that's being done with these satellites and with all of the, when you teleography, uh, teleology to really, from a causal set, base our reality on the outcome or on the cause, to place ourselves in this prescient near future reality, and to stand back and aghast in the reflective aspect of amazement, and to say, oh, this is amazing that this is coming to be, right? Or this is amazing that that this future premonition came to be, when you were aberrantly just going along with something that you were projecting into the future all along, and you live in this state of denial that you weren't the one who implanted that selfish need in the near future. Well, that's happening all the time, every day. And even more so, technology has been developed to ensure that this takes place. So what happens when you have millions upon millions, billions upon billions of causal sets of base reality, where two people can never agree on anything, right? You have this highly warped perspective. And so if everyone isn't seeing into the near or distant future, the idea of collective art, or an open source, or a general consensus to manipulate you, to get you to want certain things, where you want a pack of Cheetos more than you want to fix reality. You want a new bank account with a lower interest rate, and a higher yield, because you no longer um, want the responsibility of creating reality. And that is what your general purpose is to create reality. So even you know instead of coming with the obvious demands, people would rather trip out when they go into these sort of Terence McKenna, machine elf, um, uh, forks off reality, right? That they'd rather trip out and posit and postulate, what does this mean? and laughing amongst themselves, and talking about their trip with other people, instead of, you know what I should have done? The state of mind I should have been in, which is, the first question should have been, how do I fix this? How do I make things better? Right? And then you would come back, you would be mirrored off, right, of yourself through selfhood, that you're asking the wrong questions. You always have the power to purify, to become pure, and to see that pure state as the only cause, the only thing that should be projected into any future, and that you're going to have to stop trying to control the ontology and watch it naturally unfold before you. But if you put purity in your future, everything will be fixed, and there is no abstraction. You can't say that as a base, purity can be compared to truth. Truth is always subjective, right? Because you have all these warped Kozarev mirrors walking around you that are living according to their own base wants. That's not really what they want. But in the pure sense, when we're talking absolute purity, the absolute pure water, that if you put a drop of that pure water on your skin, it's going to rot your skin. The water remains pure. Your skin is not, right? So that's what you're inevitably going to have to deal with, is that the purity is going to amalgamate that which is necessary, that which is necessary for the pure ontology. You have to allow the pure ontology to take over for itself. And that's something that people are incapable of doing, because most, if not all, of this warped base reality of the constituents would go back into their own roots. They would no longer exist as a so-called primary fork or offshoot of the original source So we live in a tainted reality, and we want to continue to live in that tainted reality no matter how bad things are, because we have this disparate idea or ideation that somehow we exist when your body exists and you're going along for the ride with your body, and you're capitulating and supplicating yourself back to a pentagram, an inverted pentagram that is warping your world in such a drastic way that children are being sacrificed. You don't see it. You don't want to see it, right? That people are being taken literally to altars and sacrificed, that blood rituals are being done, that adrenochrome harvesting is happening. Yes, this is really happening. And it has to happen because your willful base of reality requires a midpoint or a median point that is making that happen. Your need to go and search for porn, or to just simply act like you are the false sense of piety, that you are quasi pietously, right, pseudo pietously living your life as a devout Christian when none of that even exists, right? You'd rather believe that a man hung on a cross thousands of years ago, and you don't want to hang on that cross, but he's going to hang on that cross for you. What do you want to know? What Jesus represents? It represents every person that you deny, that you got in line first, and you would aggressively kick anyone out of line that tried to cut in line. When the line doesn't exist at all, you don't exist at all, and what you're waiting for doesn't exist at all, right? And this happens all day, every day, and people live within their own bent paracosm, and there is no fixing it, right? So this is base reality. This is the general consensus of what everyone agrees upon, whether they want to admit it or not. From your grandma to your little sister, right, to your principal in school, right? She was always looking for her own idea of reality where she could be the queen. Now you have Hathor. Now you have Tiamat, right? Now you have Mother Circe. Now you live in a warped, bent space where there is no true God, and any God that you could find is nothing but a spoiled little Jungian brat queen, right? Who's really a spider at the base, because the spider is more of a transferable notion with the ideation and the ideology of this quasi consciousness that over the course of time would always have a body to re-embody itself into, right? So now you see that the queen isn't so beautiful, that the illusion has been cast before you, right? But are you going to fix it? No, because your idea of base reality means that you have to be the reincarnated version of the Queen of Sheba, right? Or Queen Elizabeth I. Any rendition of this corrupted nature, this bent form of ontology, that is the world you live in. That is the world you submit to. And not until you truly become as a Messiah, one that would give up your own life, one that would give up your own self, but not in the replication of this bent form of reality. No, that there could be a better day, and that there could be another world, a welt that would emerge, not from the ashes of this, but from the correction of this. And the only way for it to correct is for everyone to see that. But there is what we would consider through the kinetic chain a master link or a master key, a center point where all this consciousness took place in the first place, where there is basically, instead of a big bang, a little flutter that occurred, where somebody just decided to keep a little bit for themselves at one time, and mimetically what that would bring about, that act of selfishness, right? When there didn't need to ever be any. And that's what she will submit to over and over again. Her nature is a bent nature, and there is no pure principle in her and yet she's hailed as the reigning queen of purity. And then when you're face to face with it, you see that there has never been any purity within Lilith, within the Sibyl, right? Within the queen, within Eve, on into today. However you want to sort of fantasize about what that reality is, it exists in her as a crucible of the bent and warped nature of man that invariably is birthed from that corruption.